What's the saddest piece of music you've ever heard? There's plenty of good options out there, Mozart's Requiem, Chopin's Funeral March, or even Johnny Cash's rendition of Hurt. But for me, it's this one. If you don't recognize it, that's To Zanarkand from the Final Fantasy X OST. And more than 20 years after I first played the game, it still depresses me. But why? What makes it so damn sad? The context of the story behind this music plays a huge role on why it's going to give you depression. In my opinion, it's one of the best stories ever told in a video game, but it's also really complicated, so here's a quick version. Essentially, this piece is representing the death march of the love interest of the main protagonist. At this point in the game, the player and the characters believe that they are on the final stretch of the journey in which Yuna will have to sacrifice herself to save everyone else. And the characters around her have been trying to find a way to save her, but it's been in vain. And as they are journeying to the final destination, they all have a hard time accepting what is about to happen. And all of this sadness, denial, avoidance, and desperation is reflected in the music perfectly. So let's get into the music. We start in the key of E minor in 3/4 time. 3/4 is specifically chosen because it represents a dance. The dance is an important plot device earlier in the story, and this time signature is a tribute to that. The first two bars that we have are a sequence to one another, the first in E minor and the second in D major. Each of those figures feels like a sigh, and the lamenting bass line in each measure in general gives us a gloomy feeling. That B minor chord is a little unusual. In general, when playing in a minor key, the 7th scale degree is raised so that the leading tone is present in the dominant chord, and this creates a strong pull back to the tonic, E minor. So we should be seeing a B major here. With that raised leading tone, we'd get this sound in a 5/1 progression. But instead, we get this, which is a much weaker resolution. And this idea of weak resolutions is something that we are going to see over and over again in this piece. My theory is that these weak resolutions are the characters of the story avoiding the hard truth that is coming, but we'll see how this plays out as the piece goes on. In measures 5 and 6, we get this dissonant melody with a B natural being emphasized over a C major chord, with the ending having a large leap downward, again reinforcing the mood. And in the next two measures, we get another weak, dominant B minor chord with one spicy note in the bass line. That C sharp suggests a little bit of E Dorian is coming through here for a bit of a color change. We're going to see a few of those throughout the piece. In measures 9 and 10, we get the same melody a fourth higher, but now the dissonances and consonances are reversed. And now we get something really interesting, a really big F major arpeggio. In the key of E minor, an F major chord is known as a Neapolitan chord, or a chord that is built on the flat 2 of the E minor scale, F natural. This chord can be thought of as borrowing from the Phrygian mode, E Phrygian, where the F major chord naturally appears on the 2nd scale degree. But in this case, it isn't really used right. Normally, the Neapolitan acts as a subdominant chord that resolves to the dominant and then back to the tonic, and it is almost always seen in first inversion. Here's an example of what a normal Neapolitan progression might sound like. But here's what we get instead, which almost sounds like no resolution at all, or at least a much weaker one. In measures 13 through 24, we get the main melody of the piece, and this is what I'd call the first A section. But what makes it so effective is the walking, or maybe better said, leaping bass line. Just as before, the harmony here is pretty, but it doesn't give us a lot of direction. The rhythm, in my opinion, is what gives us the sense of urgency and motion rather than the harmony itself. When we go from one phrase to another, we have this resolution, G major to E minor, which is another very weak resolution. The 7th degree D and the 5th degree B gives us a pushback to E minor, but it's very weak. And this whole section seems to represent the characters in the story rushing to find a way to save their friend, but they ultimately end up going nowhere, just like the harmony goes nowhere. All of that energy from our leaping bass line comes to a halt here in measure 25 with something that almost resembles a perfect cadence. The harmony in measure 24 is G major, and that wants to resolve to a C major chord, and we get that, kinda. The chord that we resolve to in measure 25 might be considered a cluster chord. Its notes are C, D, E, B, which would technically be a C major 7, add 9, no 5th, and this muddies up the resolution of the G major chord. Plus, the C major chord is played as a broken chord, which again adds to the muddiness. The melody in this section is similar to the one that we had in measure 5, but reharmonized. There we had a persistent C major 7, where here we get a D dominant 7 in the second bar that resolves in a different way, this time to a G instead of an F sharp. This whole section to me steals the energy away from the previous, as if everyone is losing hope. And then again, just after, we get a very weak cadence that is avoiding the tonic E minor and instead resolves to the 6th chord, C major. At some point, we are going to get an actual resolution, I'm sure of it. In measure 28 to 30, we get a rising C major arpeggio similar to the Neapolitan we saw in measure 12, but now we resolve it a little differently and actually change key for the first time in the piece, of course with a very weak cadence, C major moving to A minor. The next 4 measures are what I would call the beginning of the B section with this new melody. It feels a little more resolute than the melody in the A section, but the harmony is almost exactly the same, now just in the key of A minor. We get a 1-6-7-5 instead of a 1-6-7-3. But with the lack of the leading tone, the function of that 3 chord and the 5 chord is pretty much the same. And of course, the section is again energized with the bass line. Starting in measure 34, we get the most harmonically complex section of the piece. This section starts on a B minor chord, which tells us that we're moving out of A minor, but how exactly we're going to do that is quite ambiguous. B minor doesn't belong in A minor, but it could belong in E minor, so maybe we're moving back that way. But then we get this chord, F sharp minor, which doesn't belong to A minor or E minor, but does belong to B minor, so maybe that's the goal. But then we go right back to A minor again, with this chord that is a chromatic mediant to the previous chord. Chromatic mediant is a chord that's a third away with just one common tone. But then in measure 37, we get an honest-to-God B7 chord, the first one in the piece, which suggests that we are going back to E minor for the first real resolution. But then we get the bait and switch again, and that B7 has a very strange resolution back to a B minor chord, which again feels like no resolution at all. We then hear that same B melody again, this time in B minor, with the same harmony. This melody then resolves to a C sharp minor chord, which suggests yet another key center. At this point, the music seems to be saying, I will do anything except resolve back to E minor with a perfect cadence. It just continues to fight the inevitable, just the same as the characters are. We then have another interesting harmonic move from C sharp minor to G major. The G sharp in the chord resolves down to G natural. The C sharp resolves up to D, and the E leaps down to B. It's a little strange, but it's a nice sound. Okay, so now we're back in B minor here with a G major chord for the first half of the bar, and a quick B minor in the second half. And then we get an F sharp minor chord that would suggest another weak resolution to the key of B minor. But instead, we resolve back to B major, that almost reluctantly walks up its notes before finally the music breaks with a true cadence in E minor. And after that B major chord, we finally get that A melody again, but this time there is no energy. The walking bass line is replaced with broken block chords. And the music feels at its lowest here, as if it has given up along with the rest of the characters. I think the real genius of this composition comes from this whole section, avoiding that inevitable resolution as long as possible with every compositional trick in the book, and then when we finally do get it, it's a real tearjerker. Most of the rest of this piece is a repetition of what happened before. The energy increases again, especially in this section, and then ends on another kind of pathetic B major cadence. So there you have it, the combination of a memorable melody, ambiguous harmony, weak and avoidant cadences sprinkled in with a little bit of mode mixture and compositional tricks, along with the context of the characters and the story makes this, at least for me, one of the saddest pieces of music I've ever heard. This is a different style of video than I normally do, so I hope you enjoy. Leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.